The rain had already been falling for hours before anyone noticed the morning. It was not a loud rain. There was no thunder rolling across the hills, no flashes of bright light breaking through the darkness. Instead, it was the kind of gentle rain that seemed perfectly content to stay for the whole day. Each drop landed softly upon the red clay rooftops of ancient Rome, creating a quiet rhythm that blended with the peaceful silence before sunrise. The great city still slept beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Far above, the stars had disappeared behind layers of rain-filled sky. The moon, hidden somewhere beyond the clouds, gave no light of its own. Only a faint silver glow rested over the sleeping streets, making the wet stones shimmer gently whenever a small stream of water crossed their surface. If you had been standing outside the city walls at this quiet hour, you would have seen Rome resting in unusual calm. The mighty walls stretched through the darkness, their stones darkened by the rain. Watchtowers stood silently above the gates, where a few sleepy guards continued their duty. Their wool cloaks had grown heavy with moisture, but they hardly seemed to notice any more. They had stood through many rainy nights before. One guard slowly shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His sandals made a soft scraping sound against the wet stone floor. He looked toward the eastern horizon. There was still no sunrise. Only darkness. Only rain. Beyond the walls, the countryside lay peaceful beneath the same quiet sky. Fields of wheat had already been harvested weeks before, leaving neat rows of golden stubble across the land. Vineyards rested patiently, their leaves glistening with tiny drops of water. Olive trees stood almost perfectly still, their silver-green leaves gently catching the rain. Small farms dotted the landscape. Most families were still asleep inside simple homes built from stone, wood, and clay. Smoke no longer rose from their chimneys. The cooking fires had long since burned low during the night. Only the rain remained awake. It touched every roof, every road, every garden, every tree. Its gentle voice spread across the countryside before slowly reaching the great city itself. Inside Rome, narrow streets wound between countless buildings. Some were grand homes belonging to wealthy families. Others were crowded apartment buildings where dozens of ordinary Romans lived close together. Rainwater flowed carefully along the edges of the streets, following channels built many generations before. Roman engineers understood that even gentle rain needed somewhere to go. Small drains carried water away toward larger sewers hidden beneath the city. Nothing seemed hurried. Nothing seemed troubled. The city simply accepted the rain as another ordinary visitor. Near the center of Rome stood a modest house built around an open courtyard. Like many Roman homes, its roof sloped inward rather than outward. Rainwater fell through the open space above the atrium, landing gently inside a shallow stone basin. Drop, drop, drop. Each ripple spread quietly across the still water before disappearing. Beside the basin rested a small clay lamp. Its flame flickered softly. The oil inside was nearly gone after burning through the long night. Nearby, curled into a comfortable circle upon a folded blanket, slept a gray cat. One ear twitched. Its eyes opened for only a moment. The cat listened to the rain. Apparently satisfied that nothing unusual was happening, it closed its eyes once again. Inside another room, a man stirred beneath thick wool blankets. He did not wake immediately. Instead, he remained still, listening. The rain was familiar. He had heard it thousands of times throughout his life. When he was a child, he had listened to rain while lying beside his parents. Later, as a young apprentice learning his trade, he had walked through rainy mornings carrying heavy tools. Now, many years later, the sound still brought the same quiet feeling. There would be work today. There was always work. Rain simply changed its rhythm. The room remained cool. Stone walls often held the night's chill long after sunrise. A wooden chest stood against one wall. Several clay jars rested beside it. Simple clothing hung neatly from wooden pegs. Nothing inside the room appeared luxurious. Yet everything had its place. Romans appreciated order in everyday life. A well-made stool might remain useful for decades. A carefully woven basket could serve one family through many seasons. A clay bowl, if treated gently, might pass from parents to children. Outside, somewhere far away, a rooster finally called. Its voice drifted softly through the damp morning air. Another answered from a different neighborhood. Then another. Little by little, Rome began to wake. Not all at once. Never all at once. One family lit their morning fire. Another opened a wooden shutter. Someone coughed. Someone stretched. Someone whispered a quiet greeting. The rain continued without interruption. As the eastern sky slowly grew lighter behind the clouds, the streets became easier to see. Water reflected the faint morning light like polished glass. The paving stones, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, gleamed beneath the steady drizzle. A lone baker stepped outside his workshop. He breathed deeply. The cool air carried the fresh scent of wet earth mixed with smoke from yesterday's fire. He smiled very slightly. Rain often meant people would arrive earlier for warm bread. There was comfort in fresh food on a gray morning. He disappeared back inside. Soon the familiar smell of baking grain began drifting through nearby streets. Warm bread. Warm ovens. Warm kitchens. Even on the rainiest day, those simple comforts made the city feel welcoming. Across Rome, more lamps slowly came to life. Golden light appeared behind small windows. Doorways opened one after another. The sleepy city stretched gently into another day. No emperor announced this morning. No great parade marched through the streets. No famous speech echoed across the forums. Instead, thousands of ordinary lives quietly began again beneath the patient rain. Every loaf of bread baked this morning. Every cloak fastened against the weather. Every child rubbing sleepy eyes. Every merchant preparing a market stall. Every servant sweeping yesterday's dust from a doorway. These small moments rarely found their way into history books. Yet together they formed the true heartbeat of ancient Rome. The rain seemed to know this. It did not hurry anyone. It simply fell. Softly. Steadily. As though it had all the time in the world. And as the first true light of morning spread across the rooftops, one particular household was finally beginning to wake, a family whose ordinary rainy day would quietly carry us deeper into the living heart of ancient Rome. The first sound inside the house was not a voice. It was the quiet crackle of a small fire being brought back to life. Near the kitchen, where yesterday's ashes still held a little warmth, an elderly woman knelt beside the hearth. She moved slowly, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that careful hands often worked better than hurried ones. She placed a few pieces of dry wood beneath the fading coals. Then she leaned forward and blew gently. For a moment, nothing happened. The room remained cool and still. Then, little by little, tiny orange sparks appeared beneath the gray ash. A small flame reached upward. Another followed. Soon the fire was awake once more. Its soft glow painted warm colors across the stone walls. Outside, the rain continued its steady song. The old woman smiled quietly. A rainy morning always seemed to make the fire feel warmer. She reached for a clay pot resting nearby. Yesterday evening she had filled it with clean water from the public fountain. The water was cool, clear, and fresh. She placed the pot above the fire and waited patiently. Romans understood that many good things could not be rushed. Bread needed time to rise. Olives needed time to ripen. Wine needed time to age. Even water needed time to grow warm. In another room, the man who had stirred earlier slowly opened his eyes. For a few moments he remained beneath his wool blanket, listening. Rain against the roof. Water dripping into the courtyard basin. The faint sound of wood crackling in the kitchen. Everything sounded peaceful. He took a slow breath before sitting up. The stone floor would be cold this morning. He already knew that before his feet touched it. He folded his blanket neatly. It was something he did every morning without thinking. Many habits became so familiar that they almost seemed to happen on their own. Nearby, his simple tunic hung from a wooden peg. The cloth felt slightly cool as he put it on. He fastened a leather belt around his waist and wrapped a thick wool cloak across his shoulders. The cloak would be useful today. Even if it became damp, wool held warmth remarkably well. He stepped into the hallway. The smell of smoke and warming water greeted him before he reached the kitchen. "Good morning," the elderly woman said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost blending into the sound of the rain. He nodded with a quiet smile. No long conversation was needed. Morning often began in peaceful silence. Soon another door opened. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, stepped into the room, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. His dark hair pointed in several different directions after a long night's sleep. He looked toward the open atrium. The rain immediately caught his attention. "It is still raining," he whispered. "It is," his grandmother replied. The boy watched the drops fall into the basin. He could have watched them for several minutes without growing bored. Children often found simple things interesting. One drop. Then another. Each circle spreading across the water before quietly disappearing. Nothing about it seemed ordinary to him. His father placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "There will still be work today," he said kindly. The boy nodded. He already knew. Rain changed many things. It did not stop life. The family gathered around a small wooden table. Breakfast was simple. Fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery would not arrive until later, so they ate bread baked the previous day. The loaf had become slightly firm overnight. That was perfectly normal. The grandmother dipped small pieces into warm olive oil before placing them on clay plates. There were dried figs as well. A little goat cheese. And warm water flavored with herbs gathered from a small garden behind the house. No one hurried through the meal. Outside, the rain created a peaceful rhythm that seemed to slow everything. The boy looked toward the courtyard again. "I like rainy mornings," he said quietly. His grandmother smiled. "So do I." She remembered many rainy mornings from long ago. She remembered being a little girl herself. She remembered carrying baskets through wet streets beside her own mother. She remembered the smell of fresh bread after rain. She remembered washing vegetables while listening to water fall into the courtyard. Some memories never became old. After breakfast, everyone began preparing for the day. The grandmother swept the stone floor with a broom made from bundled twigs. The father checked a wooden shelf where his tools rested neatly. Each one had been carefully made. A hammer. A small chisel. A measuring cord. Several wooden pegs. Simple tools. Reliable tools. They had served him faithfully for years. He was a carpenter. Rainy weather often meant outdoor work would pause, but there was always something to repair indoors. Roman homes needed constant care. Doors swelled slightly in damp weather. Furniture loosened after years of use. Wooden shutters sometimes needed fresh hinges. There was never a shortage of work. The boy watched his father gather the tools. "May I come today? If the rain becomes lighter." The boy smiled. He enjoyed watching his father work. Not because the work was exciting. Because it was peaceful. There was something satisfying about seeing rough pieces of wood slowly become useful objects. A table. A chair. A storage chest. A window frame. Everything began as simple timber shaped by patient hands. Meanwhile, outside the house, Rome continued waking. The streets became busier with every passing minute. Merchants opened wooden shutters protecting their small shops. A woman carrying 2 clay jars walked carefully along the wet pavement. A donkey slowly pulled a cart loaded with baskets of vegetables covered by thick cloth. The animal paid little attention to the rain. It had walked these streets in sunshine and storms alike. Near the bakery, the smell of fresh bread grew stronger. People arrived one after another. Some carried small woven baskets. Others simply tucked warm loaves beneath their cloaks for the walk home. Steam escaped into the cool morning air every time the bakery door opened. The comforting smell drifted through the neighborhood. Even people who had already eaten paused for a moment to enjoy it. Rain seemed to carry every pleasant scent farther than usual. Across the rooftops, thin streams of water continued flowing from tile to tile. Birds remained mostly hidden beneath sheltered ledges. Only a few brave sparrows fluttered between buildings, shaking rainwater from their feathers before searching for crumbs. The city felt alive. Not loud. Not hurried. Simply awake. Everywhere, ordinary people quietly stepped into another day. The father stood beside the doorway. He looked upward. The rain had become slightly lighter now. Still steady. Still gentle. He picked up his tools. The boy reached for his own much smaller satchel, eager to help however he could. His grandmother wrapped a wool scarf around the boy's shoulders. "You'll stay warm," she said. "I will." She smiled once more. Then she watched from the doorway as father and son stepped into the rain together. The street glistened beneath the gray morning sky. Small ripples danced across every puddle. The city stretched quietly before them, waiting to reveal another peaceful day one careful step at a time. Father and son stepped carefully onto the wet stone street. The rain was still falling, though now it seemed softer than before. Tiny drops drifted through the cool morning air, landing quietly on their wool cloaks. Neither of them minded. They simply pulled their hoods a little farther forward and began walking. The narrow street curved gently between rows of stone buildings. Rainwater flowed beside the paving stones in small channels that had carried water for many years. The Romans had built these streets with care. Even after countless footsteps, wagon wheels, and seasons of weather, they remained firm beneath every traveler. The boy looked down as they walked. Each puddle reflected a different piece of the city. One held the image of a chimney. Another reflected a line of red roof tiles. One small puddle captured a patch of gray sky where raindrops landed one after another, gently breaking the reflection into endless circles. For a few moments, he forgot to look ahead. He was watching the rain paint pictures beneath his feet. His father noticed. "They are beautiful, aren't they?" he said. The boy nodded. They change every second. They do. Neither of them spoke again for a while. There was no need. The city itself was speaking softly enough. Somewhere ahead, a wooden cart rolled slowly across the stones. Its wheels made a gentle rumbling sound, softened by the wet road. A mule walked patiently in front of it, carrying a simple leather harness darkened by the rain. Every few steps, the animal lowered its head slightly as though enjoying the cool morning air. The driver sat quietly beneath a wide-brimmed hood. He held the reins loosely. There was no reason to hurry. The market would still be there when he arrived. As father and son continued walking, they passed a small bakery. Warm light spilled through the open doorway. The smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. The boy smiled. "I think they are making today's first loaves." "They have probably been working since long before sunrise," his father replied. Inside, the baker lifted golden loaves from a large stone oven. Steam rose into the cool air. One customer accepted a warm loaf with both hands, smiling as the comforting heat spread through his fingers. Fresh bread always seemed to taste even better on rainy mornings. The baker offered a polite nod to everyone who entered. His face showed the calm expression of someone who had repeated the same careful work for many years. Outside once more, the street gradually widened. More people appeared now. A woman carried a basket covered with linen to keep the contents dry. An elderly man walked slowly with a wooden cane polished smooth by years of use. Two young apprentices hurried past carrying folded cloth beneath their cloaks. A messenger crossed the street holding a small bundle of wax tablets close to his chest so the rain would not damage them. Each person had somewhere to be. Each person carried a different purpose into the day. Yet no one seemed rushed. The rain encouraged patience. Father and son reached a public fountain. Crystal clear water poured steadily from a carved stone spout into a large basin below. Several people waited quietly with clay jars. Some filled large containers for their households. Others carried smaller pitchers for drinking water during the day. The boy watched carefully. "Does the rain make the fountain overflow?" he asked. His father smiled gently. "No. This water comes from far away." He pointed beyond the city. High in the hills, fresh water begins its journey. It travels through aqueducts, always moving gently downhill until it reaches Rome. The boy imagined a long journey. Water flowing over hills. Passing through tunnels. Crossing valleys on great stone bridges. Traveling mile after mile without ever becoming tired. "It has a long trip," he whispered. "It does. And it never gets lost." His father laughed softly. "The builders made sure of that." The boy looked into the clear water. Even with rain falling from the sky, people still came here. Rain touched the roofs. The fountain gave people something different. Clean drinking water they could trust every day. One elderly woman carefully filled her jar. She thanked the young man beside her after he helped lift it onto her shoulder. Small acts of kindness happened often in Rome. Most were never remembered. Yet they quietly shaped the lives of everyone around them. The pair continued their walk. Soon they reached one of the city's busier streets. Even on a rainy morning, activity filled every corner. A fish seller arranged baskets beneath a canvas covering. Nearby, a fruit merchant carefully wiped rainwater from polished apples and ripe pears. A man selling pottery checked every bowl and jug, making sure none had shifted during the night. The smell of fresh herbs mixed with damp stone and warm bread. Mint. Rosemary. Thyme. Bay leaves. Their gentle fragrance drifted through the cool air. The boy breathed deeply. It smells different today. The rain carries every scent a little farther. The boy nodded. He could smell wet wood, fresh earth, olive oil, smoke rising from distant kitchens. Everything blended into one peaceful morning. Above them, pigeons rested beneath roof edges where the rain could not reach. Every so often, one bird fluttered down to search for crumbs before quickly returning to shelter. Even the birds seemed quieter today. As they walked farther into the city, larger buildings began to appear. Tall columns rose toward the cloudy sky. Stone walls reflected soft gray light. The streets became wider. The buildings grander. Still, the rain made everything feel calm. It softened the sharp lines of marble. It muted the sounds of footsteps. It washed yesterday's dust from every surface. The boy glanced toward his father. Have these buildings always been here? His father looked thoughtfully across the street. Not always. He rested one hand on a nearby stone wall. Many were built before I was born. Others before your grandfather was born. Some are newer. Others are already old enough that no one remembers the people who first placed these stones. The boy touched the wall as well. It felt cool beneath his fingers. Smooth in some places. Rough in others. He wondered how many thousands of hands had touched the same stone before his own. Perhaps soldiers. Perhaps merchants. Perhaps children walking beside their parents on another rainy morning many years ago. The thought made him smile. History did not always feel distant. Sometimes it rested quietly beneath a person's fingertips. The rain continued to fall. Patiently. Steadily. As though it had fallen upon these same streets for centuries. Ahead, the road slowly opened into one of Rome's great public spaces, where people from every corner of the city gathered each day. Father and son slowed their pace. The heart of the city was just beyond the next row of columns, waiting quietly beneath the gray morning sky. Father and son walked beneath a long row of stone columns. The steady sound of rain followed them as though it had become another quiet traveler, keeping pace beside them. Water dripped from the edges of rooftops, collecting in small streams that disappeared into carefully built drains beneath the streets. Ahead, the city slowly opened before them. They had reached the Forum. On bright summer days, this place was filled with endless movement. Merchants called to customers. Citizens gathered to discuss business. Messengers hurried between government buildings. Lawyers spoke before crowds. Travelers stopped to admire the great temples and public monuments. Today, everything felt different. The rain had softened the Forum. People still came and went, but their footsteps were slower. Their voices were quieter. The wide stone square glistened beneath the gray sky like polished marble. The boy stopped walking for a moment. He had visited the Forum before, but rainy mornings always made it feel like a different place. Large puddles reflected the tall columns of nearby temples. Raindrops gently disturbed those reflections, creating circles that spread across the smooth water before quietly fading away. His father stood beside him. "It looks peaceful today," the boy whispered. "It does." The two of them remained still for a few moments. Neither wanted to hurry. Sometimes the most beautiful part of a place was simply standing quietly and noticing it. A group of senators crossed the square. Their white togas were carefully gathered to keep the lower edges from dragging through the rainwater. Two attendants followed behind, carrying writing tablets wrapped in cloth. Even men responsible for important decisions had to walk carefully on slippery stones. Rain reminded everyone that nature treated people much the same. Nearby, an old stone temple stood proudly despite the weather. Its columns had faced countless storms over many generations. Wind, rain, summer heat, winter cold. The temple accepted each season with silent patience. Water slowly flowed down the grooves carved into each column. The boy watched tiny streams finding their own paths toward the ground. "It has been standing here for a very long time," he said. His father nodded. "Long before either of us. And maybe long after us too." His father smiled. Perhaps. The boy thought about that. It was difficult to imagine a building surviving longer than an entire lifetime. Yet many Roman buildings already had. Stone remembered things differently than people. A man carrying a basket of scrolls hurried across the square. He almost slipped on the wet pavement but quickly found his balance. He paused, looked around, smiled to himself, then continued walking, a little more carefully than before. The father noticed the boy watching. "Whetstone asks us to slow down." The boy nodded. "It reminds us where to place our feet." It does. Around them, ordinary life continued. A merchant carefully opened the wooden shutters of his small shop beneath an arcade. Instead of placing all his goods outside, he kept most of them safely indoors. Only a few carefully chosen items rested beneath the shelter of the roof. Bronze lamps, small clay bowls, wooden combs, simple household tools. Rainy days were not the best for selling expensive things. People often preferred to return home sooner. Still, enough customers arrived throughout the day to make opening worthwhile. Across the square, two young apprentices swept rainwater away from the entrance of a public building. Every few minutes more water replaced what they had just cleared. Neither complained. Some work simply had to be repeated. One apprentice laughed quietly. "It feels like the rain is winning." His friend smiled. For now. They continued sweeping. The father and son walked slowly toward a large covered walkway. Many Romans paused there during rainy weather. Travelers rested. Neighbors greeted one another. Business continued beneath the shelter of stone roofs supported by rows of strong columns. The sound of rain changed here. Instead of falling directly onto their cloaks, it echoed softly beyond the edge of the roof. The steady rhythm became deeper, more distant, almost like gentle music. The boy listened carefully. "It sounds different here." His father nodded. "Every place has its own sound when it rains." They stood quietly. Nearby, an elderly man sat upon a stone bench. A walking stick rested beside him. He watched the rain without speaking. Perhaps he was waiting for someone. Perhaps he simply enjoyed sitting where he could observe the city. His face carried the calm expression of someone who had seen many seasons come and go. The father offered him a respectful nod. The old man returned it with a warm smile. No words were needed. Sometimes kindness passed between strangers through nothing more than a simple gesture. A few moments later, a small group of children hurried beneath the covered walkway. Their cloaks were damp. Their sandals splashed tiny drops across the stone floor. One little girl held a small loaf of bread tightly beneath her arm, protecting it from the rain with surprising determination. Another child laughed as water dripped from the edge of his hood. Soon their mother gathered them close. She brushed rainwater from their shoulders before leading them onward. The family disappeared into another street. The boy watched them go. They seemed happy. "They have bread," his father replied softly. "They have each other." The boy smiled. That seemed like enough. Rain often encouraged families to stay close together. People walked side by side beneath shared cloaks. Neighbors offered one another shelter beneath awnings. Friends lingered longer beside warm fires. The city itself seemed to grow a little kinder on days like this. A gentle breeze drifted through the forum. It carried the scent of wet stone mixed with fresh bread from distant bakeries and faint smoke rising from household hearths. The boy breathed deeply again. He was beginning to recognize the smell of Rome in the rain. Not one single scent. Many small ones woven together. Warm wood. Olive oil. Fresh herbs. Damp wool. Rain-soaked earth. Stone that had been warmed by countless summers and cooled by today's gentle weather. Every city had its own fragrance. This was Rome's. The father rested one hand upon a nearby column. Its surface felt cool beneath his fingertips. He had repaired wooden doors inside several buildings surrounding the forum over the years. Each project had taken days. Sometimes weeks. He remembered carrying beams across these very stones. He remembered meeting skilled craftsmen from many different trades. Stone masons. Metal workers. Painters. Roof builders. Carvers. Each one quietly helping shape the city little by little. No one person built Rome. Thousands did. Generation after generation. Patient hands. Patient work. Patient years. The rain continued falling without interruption. As though it approved of slow things. As though it understood that the strongest cities, like the strongest trees, were not built in a single season. Father and son left the shelter of the colonnade and continued walking across the forum. Ahead, beyond the busy square, another neighborhood waited. It was a place filled with workshops, where the steady sound of hammers, saws, and chisels usually echoed through the streets. Even on this rainy morning, those familiar sounds were beginning to rise softly through the cool air. It was there that the father's workday would soon begin. Father and son left the quiet openness of the forum behind them. As they walked farther through the city, the grand temples and government buildings slowly gave way to narrower streets lined with workshops. The sound of voices became softer again, replaced by the familiar rhythm of craftsmen beginning another ordinary day. Rain continued to fall. Not heavily. Not lightly. Just enough to leave every rooftop shining beneath the gray morning sky. Water slipped from clay tiles in countless tiny streams. Wooden shutters glistened with moisture. Small plants growing in clay pots outside several homes looked fresher than they had the day before. The boy pulled his cloak a little closer around his shoulders. The cool air smelled different here. Less like fresh bread. More like wood. Fresh cut timber carried a warm, earthy scent that blended with the smell of damp rain. Somewhere nearby, someone had already begun sawing a long piece of oak. The sound was slow and steady. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. The father smiled. We're close. The workshop stood halfway down a quiet street. It was not a large building. Its walls were made of stone, while the wide wooden doors showed the marks of many years of use. The wood had grown smooth where countless hands had pushed them open every morning. Above the doorway hung a simple wooden sign. No bright colors. No decorations. Only a carved image of a table and a chair. Anyone passing by understood immediately what kind of work happened inside. The father reached for the heavy door. It opened with a familiar creak. Warm air drifted out to greet them. Inside, everything smelled of wood. Oak. Pine. Cypress. Olive wood. Each carried its own gentle fragrance. The workshop felt peaceful. Sunlight usually entered through several high windows, but today only soft gray daylight filtered through the clouds. Even so, the room felt bright enough. Rows of wooden boards rested neatly against one wall. Some were long and straight. Others were shorter pieces saved for smaller projects. Nothing was wasted. Even the smallest piece of good wood might become part of a box, a spoon, or the leg of a stool someday. The boy always enjoyed looking around the workshop. To him, it felt almost like visiting a forest that had quietly moved indoors. His father carefully placed his tools upon a sturdy workbench. Each tool had its place. The hammer rested beside the chisels. The measuring cord hung from a wooden peg. The hand plane sat near the edge of the table. A small brush waited nearby for sweeping away wood shavings. Everything remained orderly. A tidy workshop made careful work easier. Not long after they arrived, another carpenter entered through the doorway. His beard was touched with gray, and his wool cloak carried tiny drops of rain. "Good morning," he said warmly. "And a peaceful morning to you." The two men smiled. They had worked together for many years. They understood each other's habits without needing many words. The older carpenter removed his damp cloak and hung it near the door. "It looks like the rain plans to stay." "It certainly does. Good weather for indoor work." "It is." The conversation ended there. Neither man felt the need to speak more. The workshop itself was already full of quiet sounds. The scrape of wood. The gentle tap of a hammer. The whisper of a brush clearing sawdust from a bench. The boy walked slowly between the stacks of timber. He loved running his fingers gently across the smooth grain. Every board looked different. Some showed long, straight lines. Others held swirling patterns like tiny rivers frozen inside the wood. His father noticed him studying one large plank. "Every tree grows its own story," he said. The boy looked closely. "You can see it here." "In a way." He stepped beside him. "The rings inside a tree tell how it lived. Some years it grows quickly. Other years more slowly. Dry seasons leave one kind of mark. Wet seasons leave another." The boy imagined a great tree standing somewhere beyond Rome. Growing quietly through spring, summer, autumn, winter, year after year. Long before it became part of this workshop. Long before it would become someone's table or door. It seemed almost magical. His father picked up a small block of olive wood. "This one will become a bowl." The boy held it carefully. It felt heavier than it looked. "It doesn't look like a bowl yet." His father smiled. "Most things don't." He picked up a carving knife. "You have to imagine what is waiting inside." The boy watched as the first thin curl of wood slowly lifted away. Only a tiny piece. Almost nothing. But it was enough. The block had already begun changing. The workshop door opened again. A woman entered carrying a folded wool blanket. She greeted the carpenters politely. "I've brought the blanket we spoke about." The father nodded. She unfolded it across the workbench. Inside rested several broken wooden chair parts. One leg had split. Another had become loose. The backrest leaned slightly to one side. "It belonged to my parents," she explained quietly. "I was hoping it could be repaired." The father examined the chair carefully. He turned each piece slowly in his hands. Wood often revealed its problems if given enough attention. After a few moments, he smiled gently. "It can be repaired." Relief appeared on the woman's face. "I am glad." It will take a little time. I don't mind. She thanked him warmly before leaving the workshop once again. The rain welcomed her back into the street. The boy looked at the broken chair. It looks old. It is. Why doesn't she buy a new one? His father rested a hand upon the worn wood. Sometimes old things carry memories. The boy remained quiet. The chair had once belonged to her parents. Perhaps they had shared countless evening meals sitting there. Perhaps they had told stories beside the fire. Perhaps they had watched children grow older while resting in those same seats. A new chair could never replace those memories. His father seemed to understand exactly what he was thinking. Repairing something is not always about saving wood. What else is it about? Sometimes we help people keep a small part of their lives. The boy nodded slowly. He had never thought about it that way. Outside, rain tapped gently against the wooden roof. Inside, the warm workshop filled with the peaceful scent of fresh-cut timber. Wood shavings slowly gathered across the floor like pale golden leaves. The father began repairing the chair. Not quickly. Not slowly. Simply carefully. Every movement seemed calm. Every tool knew its purpose. The boy sat quietly nearby, watching each step with complete attention. He was learning something that reached far beyond woodworking. He was learning patience. The kind of patience that could not be taught with words alone. Only by watching steady hands perform honest work, one careful movement after another. Outside, Rome continued its rainy day. But inside the little workshop, surrounded by the gentle smell of wood and the soft music of falling rain, time itself seemed to move just a little more slowly. The rain continued without pause. It had now become part of the day itself, as ordinary as breathing. No one in the workshop spoke about it anymore. The gentle sound upon the roof had settled into the background, blending with every quiet movement inside the room. The father stood at his workbench. Before him rested the old chair. He did not begin repairing it immediately. Instead, he simply looked at it. The boy noticed. "You are waiting." His father smiled. "I am studying." The boy stepped closer. The chair seemed simple enough. One leg was broken. Another felt loose. The backrest leaned slightly. It looked obvious. "What are you studying?" "The wood." The father ran his fingers slowly across one of the chair legs. His fingertips paused over every small crack. "Wood tells you what happened, if you are willing to listen." The boy looked carefully. At first, he saw only scratches. Then he noticed something else. The worn places where hands had rested for many years. The smooth edge where countless fingers had gripped the chair while standing up. The faded polish where clothing had gently rubbed against the wood. "It has been used for a long time," the boy whispered. "It has." His father nodded. "And it has served its family well." For another quiet moment, neither of them spoke. The father finally reached for a small chisel. Not the largest. Not the smallest. Just the one that felt right for this piece of work. He placed the tip gently against the damaged wood. Tap. A light touch from the wooden mallet. A tiny shaving lifted away. Another gentle tap. Another small curl of wood. The boy watched every movement. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was wasted. Each motion seemed to belong exactly where it was. Across the workshop, the older carpenter was building a small storage chest. His saw moved in long, even strokes. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. The sound blended perfectly with the rain. It was almost impossible to tell where one rhythm ended and the other began. Near the doorway, a young apprentice swept the floor. Fresh wood shavings had gathered beneath the benches like pale autumn leaves. He swept them into a neat pile. Later, they would not be thrown away. Some would be used to help start tomorrow morning's fire. Even small things found another purpose. Waste was rare. Wood was valuable. Time was valuable. Good work was valuable. Outside, a pair of pigeons landed beneath the roof overhang. They shook the rain from their feathers before settling onto a wooden beam. One bird tucked its head beneath a wing. The other quietly watched the street. The boy noticed them through the open doorway. They found a dry place. His father looked up briefly. Every creature searches for shelter. The pigeons remained perfectly still. The rain continued falling beyond them. Several moments later, footsteps approached outside. A man carrying a rolled piece of cloth paused beneath the workshop entrance. He gently knocked against the open door. "Good morning." The father looked up. "And good morning to you." The visitor carefully unrolled the cloth across the workbench. Inside lay several carved wooden panels. One had split during the damp weather. "I hoped you might repair this." The father examined the crack. "It can be done." "I was afraid it could not." The carpenter smiled kindly. "Wood is patient." The visitor looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "It has already waited many years while growing as a tree." He rested one hand upon the panel. "It can wait a little longer while we help it?" The visitor smiled. "I never thought about it that way." Many people did not. Most simply saw finished objects. A chair. A door. A chest. A bowl. The father still saw the tree inside each piece. Perhaps that was why he treated every board with such care. The visitor thanked him before stepping back into the rain. His sandals splashed quietly through the shallow water outside. The workshop became peaceful once more. The boy wandered toward a shelf along the far wall. There rested dozens of finished pieces waiting for their owners. Small stools. Wooden spoons. Boxes with sliding lids. Simple shelves. Children's toys carved from leftover pieces of pine. One small horse caught his attention. Its legs were slightly uneven. Its tail had been carved with only a few careful cuts. Yet somehow it looked alive. He picked it up gently. His father noticed. "I made that years ago." "You did?" "For a little girl." "Did she like it?" "I believe she did." The boy smiled. He imagined another rainy day many years earlier. A little girl receiving the tiny wooden horse. Perhaps she carried it everywhere. Perhaps it rested beside her bed each night. Perhaps, by now, she was already grown. Maybe the horse still sat somewhere inside her home. Old toys often became quiet memories. The father returned to the chair. He carefully fitted the repaired leg into place. No force. No struggle. Everything aligned naturally. He applied warm glue made from animal hide, a common adhesive used by Roman craftsmen. The smell was faint but familiar. He held the joint firmly until it settled. "There," he whispered almost to himself. The boy watched closely. "Is it finished?" His father shook his head. "Almost." He wrapped a strip of cloth tightly around the repaired section. "It must rest." "Why?" "So the glue can become strong." The boy nodded. Even repairs needed time. Nothing lasting could be rushed. Outside, the rain became slightly heavier for a few minutes. Drops drummed softly upon the wooden roof. Water spilled from the eaves in shining streams. People walking through the street pulled their cloaks a little tighter. A donkey paused beneath a nearby awning. Its owner laughed softly. "I suppose we're waiting together." The animal blinked calmly. It seemed perfectly content to stand where it was. Inside the workshop, no one hurried because of the weather. The older carpenter continued measuring boards. The apprentice sharpened several chisels upon a smooth stone. The father polished one corner of the repaired chair until it matched the rest of the wood. The boy simply watched. There was something deeply comforting about seeing skilled hands at work. No loud noises. No sudden movements. Only quiet concentration. The kind that made time feel gentle. The kind that invited the mind to become still. Hours seemed smaller inside the workshop. The rain outside continued its endless conversation with the rooftops of Rome. Inside, another conversation quietly unfolded. It was the conversation between wood and tools. Between patience and practice. Between careful hands and honest work. And little by little, without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, the broken chair slowly began to look whole again. Without anyone noticing the exact moment, the morning quietly slipped toward midday. The rain had never stopped. Sometimes it became a little softer. Sometimes it grew a little stronger. But it remained patient, falling over Rome with the same gentle rhythm it had carried since before dawn. Inside the workshop, the light slowly changed. The gray sky outside made the daylight softer than usual. There were no sharp shadows stretching across the floor. Instead, every corner of the room rested beneath a calm, even light. The father looked toward the doorway. It must be close to midday. The older carpenter nodded. "I believe you're right." Neither of them owned a clock. Very few people did. Instead, Romans paid attention to the world around them. The position of the sun. The length of shadows. The sounds of the city. The routines that repeated every day. Even on cloudy mornings like this, experienced craftsmen somehow knew when the hours had quietly passed. Far across the neighborhood, a deep bronze bell began to ring. Its voice drifted slowly through the rain. One calm note. Then another. The sound echoed between stone buildings before gently fading into the distance. The boy stopped what he was doing. "I like that sound." His father smiled. "So do I." The bell did not hurry anyone. It simply reminded the city that another part of the day had arrived. Soon, other familiar sounds followed. A nearby blacksmith laid down his hammer. The ringing of iron against iron came to a stop. Across the street, a potter carefully covered several unfired bowls with cloth to protect them from the damp air. A tailor folded the piece of linen he had been sewing and stretched his tired shoulders. For many craftsmen, it was time to pause. The workshop grew quieter. The older carpenter reached beneath the workbench and lifted out a woven basket. Inside rested a simple midday meal. A round loaf of bread. A small piece of goat cheese. Several olives. A handful of dried figs. Nothing more. Nothing less. He smiled warmly. "Shall we eat?" The father nodded. "I think we've earned it." The boy's eyes brightened. He had been busy watching the repairs all morning and had hardly noticed how hungry he had become. The three of them gathered around a sturdy wooden table near the back of the workshop. Rain tapped softly against the roof above them. The father cut the bread into thick slices with a small knife. The crust crackled gently beneath the blade. Warm bread from the morning bakery still carried a faint smell of freshly baked grain. The older carpenter poured a little olive oil into a shallow clay dish. Each person dipped a piece of bread before eating. No one rushed. Meals were moments to rest. The boy reached for one of the olives. He tasted it slowly. It is salty. The older carpenter chuckled quietly. It reminds us of the sea. The boy smiled. He had never seen the sea. Only heard stories about it. He imagined endless blue water stretching farther than anyone could walk. Ships sailing across gentle waves. Seabirds circling high above. One day, perhaps, he hoped to see it. For now, the olive carried just a tiny hint of that distant place. The father noticed his thoughtful expression. "What are you imagining?" "The sea." His father smiled. "It is a peaceful place on calm days." "And on rainy days?" The older carpenter answered first. "The rain makes the water look silver." The boy liked that picture. Silver water beneath gray clouds. He tucked the thought safely into his memory. Outside, several people hurried along the street carrying baskets beneath thick cloth coverings. A merchant carefully closed one shutter against a stronger burst of rain. Across the road, two children laughed as they jumped over a long puddle. One landed safely. The other splashed directly into the water. For just a moment, both children stood completely still. Then they looked at each other and laughed even harder. Their mother shook her head with a smile before brushing rainwater from the younger child's cloak. The father watched through the doorway. Rain has a way of finding everyone. The older carpenter nodded. It reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. The three of them continued eating quietly. The smell of fresh wood surrounded them. The workshop felt warm despite the cool weather outside. Tiny curls of wood still rested across one corner of the floor where the morning's work had ended. The boy absent-mindedly picked up one delicate shaving. It curled around his finger like a ribbon. "So thin," he whispered. His father looked over. "Sometimes the smallest cut makes the smoothest surface." The boy nodded thoughtfully. He was beginning to notice that almost everything his father said carried two meanings. One about wood. Another about life. Neither man explained these lessons. They simply appeared during ordinary conversation, as naturally as the rain itself. After finishing the meal, the older carpenter carefully gathered every crumb from the table. None would be wasted. Some crumbs were placed outside beneath the shelter of the roof. The pigeons waiting there immediately noticed. One bird hopped forward cautiously. Then another. Within moments they were quietly pecking at the bread. The boy watched with a smile. They were waiting. They usually are. The older carpenter laughed softly. "I believe they know exactly when we finish lunch." The pigeons seemed perfectly content. They hardly noticed the rain beyond the edge of the roof. Shelter. Food. Quiet. For the moment, they needed nothing more. The father stood and stretched. Not because he was tired. Simply because several hours at the workbench had left his back a little stiff. He walked toward the repaired chair. The cloth wrapped around its leg remained firmly in place. He touched it gently. The glue was drying well. "It will be ready this afternoon." The boy stepped beside him. "It already looks stronger." "It is. But strength often grows quietly." The boy thought about those words. Outside, the rain continued falling over rooftops, gardens, temples, workshops, and narrow streets. It strengthened rivers without anyone watching. It filled wells little by little. It nourished trees one drop at a time. Perhaps strength really did grow quietly. The midday meal had ended. The workshop slowly returned to life. The older carpenter reached for his saw once more. The apprentice began sorting pieces of timber. The father removed another project from the shelf, a small wooden cradle that still needed careful sanding before it would be ready for the family waiting to welcome their newborn child. The boy watched him lift it gently. The cradle looked simple. Yet somehow it already seemed filled with hope. Outside, the rain softly sang its endless song. Inside, the quiet work of patient hands began again. The workshop settled into its quiet rhythm once again. Lunch was over. The bread had been shared. The olives were gone. The little clay cups had been rinsed with clean water and placed upside down to dry beside the hearth. Outside, the rain still fell with the same patient kindness that had greeted the city before sunrise. Inside, the father carefully lifted the small wooden cradle onto his workbench. The boy walked closer. He had noticed the cradle earlier that morning, resting on a shelf near the back of the workshop, but he had not looked at it closely until now. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No bright paint. No carved animals. No precious stones. Only smooth wood, shaped with care. Its gentle curves reminded the boy of a small boat resting quietly upon calm water. "Who is it for?" he asked softly. "A young family," his father replied. "Their first child." The boy smiled. "They must be excited." "I imagine they are." His father rested one hand on the smooth wooden rail. "They came here several weeks ago. They chose the wood themselves." "What kind of wood is it?" "Maple." The father pointed toward the pale surface. "It is strong. It lasts many years. And it becomes very smooth when carefully finished." The boy reached out. His fingertips barely touched the wood. It already felt soft. Almost warm. His father picked up a small piece of fine sand mixed with powdered stone, wrapped inside a folded piece of cloth. There was no sandpaper as people know it today. Roman craftsmen polished wood using natural materials, rubbing patiently until every rough place slowly disappeared. He began moving the cloth in slow circles across one side of the cradle. Back and forth. Again and again. The sound was almost silent. Just a gentle whisper against the wood. The boy watched closely. "You already made it smooth." His father smiled. "I did." "Then why smooth it again?" "Because a baby's hands are smaller than ours." The boy looked thoughtful. "They will notice things we do not." The father nodded. "A tiny rough place that I cannot feel might still catch delicate skin. So I keep looking. And I keep smoothing." The boy nodded slowly. He liked the idea. Doing something well often meant paying attention to things other people might never notice. Across the workshop, the older carpenter continued fitting together the corners of a large wooden chest. He carefully checked every joint before tapping each wooden peg into place with a small mallet. Tap. 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 The sound echoed softly through the room. Not loud enough to disturb the peaceful afternoon. Just enough to remind everyone that steady work was continuing. Near the open doorway, the apprentice sorted small pieces of leftover timber into separate baskets. One basket held oak. Another held pine. Another held olive wood. Even tiny pieces no larger than a person's hand were carefully saved. The boy wandered over. "So many little pieces." The apprentice smiled. "Little pieces become little things." He picked up a short block of olive wood. "This could become a spoon." Another piece. "This one could become a toy." He held up a narrow strip. Or perhaps the handle of a knife. Nothing seemed too small. Every piece waited patiently for its next purpose. The boy wondered how many objects around Rome had once been forgotten scraps resting in workshops like this one. Perhaps quite a few. Rain encouraged careful thinking. It slowed the world just enough for small ideas to appear. Outside, footsteps splashed gently through the street. A woman carrying a basket paused beneath the workshop roof to escape a brief increase in the rain. She smiled politely toward those inside. "No hurry," the older carpenter said kindly. "You're welcome to stay dry for a while." She thanked him. "I think I will." She stood quietly near the entrance. No one seemed bothered by the unexpected visitor. Rain often created small moments of shared shelter. Strangers became temporary neighbors beneath the same roof. For several minutes, no one spoke. The woman watched the craftsman work. The craftsman continued working. The rain filled the silence with its gentle music. Finally, she smiled. "It always looks peaceful in here." The father glanced up. "It usually feels that way." She nodded. "My husband was a mason. He always said that every craft has its own sound." The older carpenter smiled warmly. He was right. The woman listened. Saw against wood. Brush against timber. Soft tapping from the mallet. Rain upon the roof. "It does sound peaceful," she whispered. After a little while, the rain eased again. She thanked everyone for their kindness before continuing on her way. The street quietly welcomed her back. The boy watched her disappear around the corner. She seemed nice. His father nodded. Rain gives people chances to meet. The afternoon continued. The father gently turned the cradle upside down. He inspected every joint, every curve, every peg. His fingers moved slowly across each surface. Satisfied, he reached for a small clay jar resting on a nearby shelf. Inside was warm beeswax mixed with olive oil. The mixture gave finished wood a soft shine while helping protect it from moisture. The boy leaned closer. "It smells sweet." "It does. The bees worked hard to make it." The father dipped a clean cloth into the wax. Then he spread a very thin layer across the cradle. Immediately the wood seemed richer. The pale maple glowed softly beneath the workshop light. The grain became more visible. Gentle lines flowed through the wood like quiet streams crossing a hillside. The father smiled. "There. It looks alive." The boy nodded. "It almost does." He imagined the cradle standing beside a family's bed. A tiny child sleeping peacefully inside. Rain tapping softly against another Roman roof. Parents speaking in quiet voices so they would not wake the baby. The thought made him feel strangely peaceful. Outside, a cool breeze drifted through the open doorway. It carried the smell of rain-soaked earth from gardens beyond the city. Somewhere nearby, a dove called gently from beneath a sheltered roof. The sound lingered for only a moment before fading into the steady whisper of rainfall. The father placed the finished cradle carefully upon a shelf. It would remain there until the family arrived. He looked at it with quiet satisfaction. Not pride. Simply gratitude. Another useful thing had been made with honest hands. Another family would soon carry it home. Another child would begin life surrounded by care. The boy looked around the workshop. The repaired chair. The wooden chest. The shelves. The stools. The bowls. The cradle. None of them were grand treasures. Yet every one of them would become part of someone's everyday life. People would eat beside them, rest upon them, store precious belongings inside them, raise children around them, grow old with them. Perhaps that was what made ordinary work so meaningful. The rain outside showed no sign of ending. And inside the little workshop, the afternoon continued its gentle journey, one careful task after another. The afternoon moved quietly onward. Outside, the rain continued its gentle conversation with the rooftops of Rome. The streets remained wet, their smooth stones shining beneath the soft gray sky. Small streams of water wandered along the gutters, carrying away fallen leaves and tiny bits of dust that had gathered during the drier days before. Inside the workshop, the air was warm. The smell of fresh timber mixed with beeswax, olive oil, and the faint scent of the fire burning in the hearth near the back wall. It was a comforting smell, one that seemed to settle gently into every piece of clothing and every wooden beam inside the building. The father placed his tools back in their usual places. The repair chair rested safely beside the wall. The cradle waited quietly on its shelf. For a few moments, no one spoke. Only the peaceful sounds of work filled the room. The apprentice was carefully sharpening a chisel. He dipped the blade into a small bowl of water before sliding it across a smooth sharpening stone. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. The sound was soft. Almost like someone whispering. Across the room, the older carpenter measured another board. He stretched a simple cord from one end to the other before making a small mark with a piece of charcoal. He measured twice. Then nodded to himself. Only then did he reach for his saw. The boy noticed. "You always measure 2 times. The older carpenter smiled without looking up. "Sometimes 3. "Why?" "Because wood forgives very little." The boy thought about that. "If you cut too short, you cannot make it longer again." The apprentice laughed quietly. "That lesson only needs to be learned once." Everyone smiled. Even the father. Outside, a stronger breeze drifted through the narrow street. Rain blew gently beneath the roof for just a moment before settling again. The pigeons waiting near the doorway fluttered farther inside, finding a dry beam above the entrance. One bird shook tiny drops of water from its feathers. The boy watched it carefully. "It doesn't seem upset." His father glanced toward the bird. Animals often accept the weather more easily than people. The pigeon closed its eyes for a few moments, perfectly content beneath its shelter. Not long afterward, footsteps approached through the rain. Slow footsteps. Careful footsteps. The sound stopped outside the workshop door. A gentle knock followed. The father walked over. Standing beneath the doorway was an elderly man wrapped in a heavy wool cloak. His silver hair was damp around the edges of his hood, and tiny drops of rain rested in his short beard. He held a walking stick made from polished olive wood. In his other hand rested a small cloth bundle. "Good afternoon," he said with a warm smile. "And a peaceful afternoon to you," the father replied. The old man looked inside the workshop. "I hope I am not disturbing anyone." "Not at all. The night is quiet. You are welcome to come inside." The wind moved soft. The visitor stepped carefully across the threshold. He removed his hood and gently shook the rain from his cloak before hanging it near the entrance. The warmth of the workshop seemed to relax his shoulders immediately. "It feels good in here," he said softly. "The fire has been burning since early morning," the apprentice replied. The old man smiled. "I can tell." For a few quiet moments he simply looked around. His eyes rested upon the shelves filled with finished work. The repair chair. The polished cradle. The wooden bowls. The storage chests. Finally, he turned back toward the father. I brought something that belonged to my grandfather. He slowly untied the cloth bundle. Inside rested a small wooden box. It was beautifully made. Simple. Elegant. Very old. The wood had grown dark with age. The corners were joined so carefully that hardly any gaps remained after many years. The lid, however, would no longer close properly. One hinge had become loose. A small crack ran across one side. The father lifted the box gently. It felt surprisingly light. He turned it slowly in his hands. The old man watched quietly. My grandfather made that himself. The father looked up. He was a carpenter. He was. The old man's smile grew a little softer. My father kept it after he passed away. And now it belongs to me. The workshop became very still. Even the boy sensed that this little box meant much more than its size suggested. The father opened the lid carefully. Inside rested only a few simple things. A small bronze coin. A smooth white stone. A short piece of faded ribbon. Nothing valuable. At least not in the usual sense. The father looked at the old man. You've kept these for many years. The visitor nodded. They remind me of people I loved. The father gently closed the lid again. The hinge can be repaired. And the crack. That too. The old man let out a slow breath. I was hoping you would say that. The father smiled kindly. Some things deserve another lifetime. The boy listened closely. He remembered what his father had said earlier about the old chair. Repairing something was not always about saving wood. Sometimes it meant protecting memories. Now he understood even better. The father carried the little box to his workbench. He did not hurry. First, he examined the old hinge. It had worn loose after many years of being opened and closed. The tiny bronze pin inside had become bent. He carefully removed it using the smallest tool on his bench. The boy leaned forward. So small. Sometimes the smallest repairs require the steadiest hands. The father straightened the pin little by little. Not forcing it. Only guiding it. When he was satisfied, he gently placed it back into the hinge. The lid opened. Then closed. Perfectly. The old man smiled immediately. It hasn't moved that smoothly in years. The father nodded. Now for the crack. He mixed a little warm glue. Using a thin wooden stick, he guided the glue deep into the narrow opening. Then he gently wrapped the box with a soft strip of linen. It must rest for a while. The old man smiled. So must I. The older carpenter laughed warmly. Then sit with us. A simple stool was placed near the fire. The visitor lowered himself carefully onto it. He held his hands toward the gentle warmth. Outside, rain continued falling across Rome. Inside, 4 generations of quiet craftsmanship seemed to share the same room. The grandfather who had built the box. The elderly man who had carried it through his life. The father now repairing it. And the young boy watching everything with wide, thoughtful eyes. The fire crackled softly. The rain whispered beyond the doorway. No one felt the need to fill the silence. Some afternoons were beautiful simply because they were quiet. The old man looked toward the boy after a while. Are you learning your father's trade? The boy smiled. I think I am. The old man nodded slowly. Then learn one thing above all else. The boy waited patiently. The old man looked toward the little wooden box resting peacefully on the workbench. Build things that people will want to keep. The workshop became still once more. The father smiled quietly but said nothing. He didn't need to. Sometimes the wisest lessons arrived as gently as the rain. And they stayed just as long. The little wooden box rested quietly on the workbench. A strip of soft linen was wrapped gently around it, holding the repaired crack together while the warm glue slowly dried. There was nothing more to do for the moment. Some things simply needed time. The father knew that. The older carpenter knew that. Even the boy was beginning to understand. Outside, the rain continued its steady journey across the rooftops of Rome. The streets shimmered beneath the gray afternoon sky, and every now and then a small breeze carried the cool scent of wet stone through the open doorway. Inside the workshop, the old man remained seated beside the fire. He held his hands near the gentle warmth, not because he was cold, but because the warmth felt pleasant after walking through the rain. The boy sat on a small wooden stool nearby. He looked at the old man. Then at the little box. Then back again. Finally, he spoke. "Did your grandfather really make it himself?" The old man smiled. "He did." The boy leaned forward a little. "What was he like?" For a moment, the old man did not answer. His eyes rested on the box. The room became very quiet. Even the rain seemed softer somehow. Then, slowly, he began to speak. He was not a famous man. He never stood before the Senate. He never commanded soldiers. He never became wealthy. The boy listened carefully. He was simply a carpenter. The father smiled quietly without looking up from his work. There was something comforting about hearing those words. The old man continued. He lived in a small house on the edge of the city. It had a tiny garden. Only a few herbs. One olive tree. And a fig tree that never seemed to grow very tall. He laughed softly. My grandmother always said it was the most stubborn tree in Rome. The boy smiled. What did he build? Oh. The old man looked toward the ceiling as memories slowly returned. He built tables. Doors. Windows. Stools. Sometimes children's toys. And once. His smile grew a little wider. He built a cradle for my father. The father paused for just a moment. His eyes drifted toward the cradle resting on the shelf nearby. Then he quietly returned to his work. The old man noticed. It looked very much like yours. The father nodded gently. Then perhaps your grandfather and I would have understood each other. I believe you would. The rain continued falling. No one hurried the story. The old man seemed content to let each memory arrive in its own time. When I was very small, he said, I loved sitting in his workshop. The boy's eyes brightened. Like this one. Very much like this one. It smelled of fresh wood. There were shavings on the floor. There were tools hanging neatly upon the walls. And every afternoon, he closed his eyes for a moment. There was sunlight coming through the doorway. He opened them again and smiled. Well. Except on rainy days. Everyone laughed softly. The older carpenter nodded. Rain changes every workshop. It does. The old man continued. My grandfather rarely spoke while he worked. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply believed that careful hands liked quiet. The father looked up. I know the feeling. The boy looked from one man to the other. You both work the same way. The father smiled. Perhaps many carpenters do. The old man nodded. The work teaches you. He looked at the boy. If you hurry, you make mistakes. If you become angry, your hands become careless. If your mind wanders, you forget the smallest details. He gently rested one hand upon his walking stick. But if you become calm, the work becomes calm too. The boy thought about those words. He had watched his father all day. Every movement had been peaceful. Every cut, every measurement, every careful repair. Perhaps the work truly did become part of the person making it. Outside, a wagon rolled slowly through the wet street. Its wooden wheels splashed gently through shallow puddles. The sound drifted past the workshop before slowly fading away. The old man looked toward the doorway. My grandfather loved rainy days. He did. He always said the rain reminded people to slow down. The father smiled. A wise thought. He believed people noticed more when they walked slowly. The smell of bread. The sound of birds. The way water gathered beneath roof tiles. The little flowers growing between stones. He said the world was always speaking. We simply forgot to listen. The workshop became quiet again. The rain softly filled the silence. The boy listened. Really listened. He heard the fire crackling. A pigeon shifting its feet upon the beam above the doorway. The gentle tapping of raindrops against the roof. Someone laughing somewhere farther down the street. A blacksmith striking metal only once before stopping again. He had heard all these sounds before. Today they seemed different. Perhaps because he was paying attention. The old man noticed the thoughtful look on the boy's face. What do you hear? The boy answered without thinking. The rain. The old man smiled. What else? The fire. The pigeon. The street. He paused. And everyone working. The old man's smile became even warmer. Good. You are listening. For several minutes, no one spoke again. The father continued smoothing the edge of a small wooden shelf. The older carpenter sorted a handful of wooden pegs into neat rows. The apprentice swept another light layer of shavings from the floor. The old man watched the fire. The boy watched everything. It was an ordinary afternoon. No important visitors. No grand celebrations. No great events that historians would write about. Yet it was filled with something just as valuable. Quiet work. Shared memories. Gentle conversation. The peaceful company of people who respected both time and one another. Eventually, the father stood and walked to the workbench. He carefully removed the linen wrapped around the little wooden box. The glue had dried perfectly. He ran one finger across the repaired crack. It was almost impossible to see where the damage had been. He opened the lid. Then closed it again. Smoothly. Silently. Just as it must have done many years before. He carried the box back to the old man with both hands. It is ready. The old man accepted it carefully. For a long moment, he simply held it. His fingers rested upon the polished wood. He smiled, though his eyes had grown slightly misty. It feels. He paused. Like coming home. The father gave a small nod. Sometimes there was nothing more that needed to be said. Outside, the rain continued its endless song over ancient Rome. Inside the workshop, one small wooden box had quietly carried the memories of 3 generations, and now, perhaps, it was ready to carry them a little farther still. The little wooden box rested safely in the old man's hands. For a while, he simply looked at it. His fingers moved slowly across the smooth lid, tracing the grain of the wood as though greeting an old friend. The repaired crack was almost impossible to see now. The hinge opened and closed without the slightest hesitation. He smiled quietly. "It feels exactly as I remember." The father bowed his head just a little. "I am glad." The old man reached into the small leather pouch tied to his belt. He carefully counted several bronze coins into his palm. The father gently raised his hand. "That is more than enough." The old man looked at him. "The repair is worth every coin." The father smiled. The repair was only part of the work. The old man seemed curious. What was the other part? The father looked toward the wooden box. "Treating it with the same care your grandfather gave it when he first made it." For a moment, the old man said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "I believe he would have thanked you." The workshop became quiet once more. The older carpenter stepped closer. He wrapped the wooden box in the same soft cloth the old man had brought earlier. Not because it needed protection anymore. Simply because rain still waited outside. "There," he said. "It should stay dry until you reach home." The old man accepted the bundle with both hands. "Thank you." He thanked each person in the workshop before putting on his heavy wool cloak. The fabric had dried a little while hanging near the fire, though it still carried the fresh smell of rain. He pulled the hood over his silver hair. Before leaving, he turned toward the boy. "You watched carefully today." "I tried." "Keep watching." The boy nodded. "I will." The old man smiled warmly. "One day, someone will watch your hands the way you watched your father's." The words lingered in the room even after he had opened the door. A cool breeze drifted inside. The rain welcomed him back into the street. They watched him walk away. His pace was slow but steady. His walking stick tapped gently against the wet stones. Tap. Step. Tap. Step. Soon he disappeared beyond the curve of the narrow street. The boy remained standing in the doorway for a moment. "I hope he gets home before the rain becomes heavier." His father looked up at the gray sky. "I think he will." The rain had settled once again into its quiet, steady rhythm. Not strong enough to trouble experienced travelers. Just enough to make every rooftop glisten. The pigeons returned to the beam above the entrance. One fluffed its feathers before tucking its head beneath a wing. The other watched the street with calm, dark eyes. The workshop seemed just a little quieter now. Visitors often left behind a certain stillness after they were gone. The father walked back to his workbench. The afternoon was beginning to slip toward evening. The light outside had changed again. Clouds softened everything until the city seemed painted in shades of silver and warm brown. The boy looked through the open doorway. "The day is getting shorter." "It is. We still have work. There is always a little more." The father picked up a wooden shelf that needed one final inspection. He turned it slowly. Every joint remained firm. Every edge felt smooth beneath his fingertips. Satisfied, he placed it beside the finished cradle. Another task completed. Across the room, the older carpenter stretched his shoulders. "I think this chest will be finished before sunset." The apprentice smiled. "And tomorrow someone will fill it?" The older carpenter nodded. "With clothes? Or blankets? Or family keepsakes?" He rested one hand upon the unfinished lid. "It is strange. We build empty things. But they never stay empty for long." The boy liked that thought. An empty chest waiting for memories. A cradle waiting for a child. A chair waiting beside a family table. even a simple wooden spoon waiting for tomorrow's meal. Every object seemed to carry a quiet promise about the future. Outside, the rain continued washing the city clean. A woman passed carrying a woven basket covered with linen. Two merchants slowly rolled a barrel toward a nearby storehouse. A dog trotted through the street before stopping beneath an awning to shake the rain from its fur. Somewhere farther away, laughter drifted briefly through the cool air before disappearing again. Life continued at its gentle pace. No one hurried. There was nowhere the rain wished anyone to rush. The father reached for a broom made from bundled twigs. Without a word, he began sweeping the workshop floor. The boy immediately picked up a smaller broom. Together they worked from opposite sides of the room. Wood shavings gathered into neat little piles. Tiny curls of maple. Long ribbons of pine. Fine dust from polished oak. The apprentice carried a basket between them. Each pile was carefully collected. Nothing would be wasted. The older carpenter opened the workshop door a little wider. Fresh air drifted inside. The smell of rain mixed with the warm scent of wood. It was a familiar fragrance. One every carpenter knew well. The father stopped sweeping for a moment. He looked around the workshop. Every tool rested where it belonged. Every finished piece waited quietly for its owner. The fire still burned gently. The room felt peaceful. "It has been a good day," he said softly. The older carpenter smiled. "A rainy day. But a good one." The boy nodded. "I think rainy days are my favorite." His father laughed quietly. "They weren't always mine." "No. When I was your age, I wanted sunshine every day." "What changed?" The father thought for a moment. Then he looked toward the open doorway, where raindrops continued falling one after another from the edge of the roof. "I learned that rain has its own kind of beauty." The boy followed his father's gaze. The drops fell with perfect patience. One after another. Never hurried. Never late. He smiled. "I think I'm learning that too." Outside, the gray afternoon slowly began leaning toward evening. The streets of Rome remained alive with quiet footsteps and gentle conversations. Lamps would soon be lit behind countless windows. Families would gather around evening meals. The smell of warm soup, fresh bread, herbs, and wood smoke would drift through the rain-filled air. But for now, inside the little carpenter's workshop, the last peaceful hours of the workday continued, one careful task at a time. The afternoon slowly began to fade. No one noticed the exact moment when it happened. The gray light outside simply became a little softer. The shadows inside the workshop grew a little longer. The rain, which had been falling since before dawn, continued with the same quiet patience. It seemed to have no destination. No hurry. No desire to be anything other than rain. The father rested his broom against the wall. The floor was clean once again. Only a few tiny curls of wood remained beneath one corner of the workbench, where they caught the fading daylight like little strands of pale gold. The older carpenter looked toward the doorway. "The light won't last much longer." The father nodded. "It is almost time." The apprentice walked to a small wooden shelf near the hearth. Several clay oil lamps rested there, waiting for evening. Each lamp was simple. A small round body. A narrow spout for the wick. A tiny handle just large enough for 2 fingers. Nothing about them was grand. Yet every evening they transformed homes, workshops, and streets with their gentle glow. The apprentice picked up the first lamp. He poured a little fresh olive oil into it. Then he carefully adjusted the linen wick. The father leaned forward with a burning splint taken from the fire. The flame touched the wick. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a small golden light appeared. It trembled gently, then became steady. The workshop felt different at once. Warmer, softer, almost quieter. One by one, more lamps were lit. Another near the doorway. One beside the workbench. One on a small shelf at the back of the room. Each flame was modest. None tried to fill the whole room with light. Together, however, they gently pushed the darkness away. The boy watched the tiny flames dancing. "I like evenings." His father smiled. "So do I. They make everything feel calm." The older carpenter nodded. "Perhaps because the day begins to ask less from us." The rain tapped softly against the roof. Its rhythm seemed to match the slow flicker of the lamps. Outside, the streets of Rome were changing too. Across the narrow lane, another workshop lit its own lamps. A warm yellow glow appeared behind wooden shutters. Farther away, a baker hung a small lantern beside his doorway. Its light reflected across the wet stones, stretching into long golden lines upon the rain-soaked street. The boy stepped outside for just a moment. He stood beneath the roof overhang where the rain could not quite reach him. The city looked beautiful. Gray clouds still covered the sky. There would be no colorful sunset today. Instead, every lamp seemed to become a tiny star. One window glowed. Then another. Soon dozens of little lights appeared across the neighborhood. Some were bright. Others were faint. Each belonged to a family preparing for the evening. He imagined what was happening behind those windows. Someone stirring a pot of soup. Someone kneading tomorrow's bread. Someone mending a cloak beside the fire. A child listening to a story before supper. An elderly couple sharing quiet conversation after another ordinary day. The city felt enormous. Yet every small light reminded him that it was also made of countless homes. Each one with its own quiet life. Each one with its own memories. The father joined him beneath the doorway. "You've become very still." The boy smiled. "I'm looking at the lamps." His father looked across the street. "They're beautiful in the rain." The boy nodded. "The rain makes them shine." Tiny reflections stretched across every puddle. Whenever a raindrop landed, each golden reflection gently trembled before becoming still again. It was as though the city itself breathed quietly. Nearby, a woman carrying a basket walked slowly through the street. A little girl held tightly to her hand. The child's hood had slipped backward, allowing a few damp curls of dark hair to frame her face. She looked into one puddle. Then another. Each reflected the warm glow of nearby lamps. She smiled. Without thinking, she reached one foot into the shallow water. Splash. Only a tiny splash. Her mother looked down. Instead of scolding her, she simply laughed softly. "Only one puddle." The little girl nodded seriously. "Only one." Father and son smiled as they watched them disappear around the corner. "Rain belongs to children too," the father said. "I think it does." The breeze carried the smell of evening meals through the neighborhood. Fresh bread. Lentils. Leeks. Roasted onions. Herbs warming over small fires. The scents drifted gently between the buildings before blending together into something uniquely Roman. The boy breathed deeply. "It smells wonderful. It always does this time of day." The father closed his eyes for a brief moment. There is something comforting about knowing that families all across the city are gathering for supper. The boy imagined thousands of tables. Some large. Some very small. Some wealthy. Others simple. Yet almost every family would pause, if only for a little while, to eat together. Rainy evenings seemed made for that. Inside the workshop, the older carpenter placed the finished wooden chest beside the repaired chair. He wiped his hands on a clean cloth and smiled with quiet satisfaction. Another day's work. The apprentice nodded. It feels good. It always should. The father looked around the room once more. The cradle. The shelf. The chair. The chest. Everything waited patiently for tomorrow. Nothing asked for praise. Nothing demanded attention. They simply stood ready to become part of someone's ordinary life. Outside, the rain continued falling across temples, homes, markets, gardens, fountains, and narrow streets. The great city of Rome slowly settled into evening. The day's busiest hours had passed. Soon the streets would grow quieter. Doors would close. Families would gather close to their fires. Stories would be shared. Children would grow sleepy. And somewhere beyond the gray clouds, though no one could see it, the evening sky quietly welcomed another night. The father rested one hand upon the workshop door. It is almost time to go home. The boy smiled. He had enjoyed every hour of the day. But the thought of walking home through the softly lit streets, with the rain still falling gently around them, somehow felt just as peaceful as everything that had come before. Together, they prepared to leave the warm workshop behind, carrying the quiet lessons of the day with them into the rainy Roman evening. For a few quiet moments, no one moved. The lamps burned steadily. The fire in the hearth gave off a gentle warmth. Outside, the rain continued its endless journey across the rooftops of Rome, falling just as patiently as it had before sunrise. The workshop had become very still. The day's work was finished. There would be no more cutting. No more measuring. No more careful tapping of wooden pegs into place. Now there remained only the small tasks that marked the peaceful end of another ordinary day. The father walked slowly to his workbench. He picked up each tool one at a time. The hammer came first. Its wooden handle had grown smooth from many years of use. He turned it over in his hands for a moment before hanging it carefully on its peg. Next came the chisels. There were several of them. Some wide. Some narrow. Each shaped for a different purpose. He wiped every blade with a clean cloth before placing it back in its proper place. The boy watched closely. You clean them every evening? His father smiled. I do. Even if they don't look dirty. Especially then. The boy looked puzzled. His father rested one chisel across his palm. A tool takes care of the craftsman who takes care of it? The boy nodded slowly. He had heard many lessons today. Some were about wood. Some were about people. This one seemed to be about both. Across the room, the older carpenter folded a heavy piece of cloth over the large wooden chest he had finished earlier that afternoon. The cloth would keep dust away until its owner arrived. He gently brushed one last curl of wood from the polished lid. There, he whispered. It can rest now. The apprentice was busy closing the wooden shutters over the workshop windows. One by one, he fastened them from the inside. The soft gray light of evening slowly disappeared. The warm glow of the oil lamps became brighter. Outside, the rain sounded slightly louder now that the windows were closed. It tapped gently against the shutters. A peaceful rhythm. Almost like someone quietly knocking. The father knelt beside the hearth. Most of the fire had already settled into glowing coals. He used a small iron poker to carefully arrange the embers. Not to make the fire larger, only to help it last a little longer. Tomorrow morning, those same warm coals might help start another day's fire. Romans rarely wasted anything that could still be useful. Even yesterday's fire helped create tomorrow's warmth. The boy crouched beside him. "The fire is going to sleep." His father smiled. "In a way. It isn't gone. It is only resting." The boy watched the glowing coals. They reminded him of tiny stars hidden beneath soft gray ash. Quiet. Patient. Still full of warmth. Outside, the street had grown calmer. Many merchants had already closed their shops. Heavy wooden doors were shut. Canvas coverings were folded away. The day's business was over. A few late travelers still walked through the rain. Most carried small oil lamps protected inside simple lanterns. Their warm light danced gently across the wet stones. Every passing lantern left a golden reflection in the puddles before disappearing around the next corner. The father lifted the repaired chair. Together, he and the older carpenter carried it to a dry corner near the front of the workshop. Its owner would likely return tomorrow. The chair looked almost new. Yet it still carried every mark of its long life. The father was pleased with that. Repairs should honor the past, not erase it. The older carpenter noticed him looking. "You've done fine work." The father nodded. "So have you." His friend smiled. "We've had a good day." "We have." Neither man spoke for a little while after that. Some friendships grew comfortable with silence. Years of working side by side had taught them that not every thought needed words. Sometimes quiet company was enough. The apprentice returned after checking the back door. "Everything is secure." The father nodded. "Thank you." The young man smiled. "I'll see you all in the morning." He gathered his cloak from its hook. Before opening the door, he paused. Rain still whispered beyond the wood. He pulled his hood over his head. Then he stepped outside. The cool evening air welcomed him. The door closed gently behind him. For a moment, only 3 people remained inside the workshop. The older carpenter stretched his shoulders. "I suppose it's our turn." "I suppose it is," the father replied. The boy picked up his small satchel. It was much lighter than his father's tool bag. Inside were only a few simple things. A piece of bread left from lunch. A smooth stone he liked to carry. A small wooden carving his father had given him long ago. Nothing valuable to anyone else. Everything valuable to him. His father lifted the leather tool bag onto one shoulder. It felt familiar there. Heavy enough to remind him of honest work. Light enough to carry home comfortably. The older carpenter took one last look around the workshop. Every lamp was burning safely. Every tool rested where it belonged. Every finished piece waited patiently for tomorrow. He smiled. "It looks peaceful." "It always does at day's end," the father replied. Together, they walked toward the front door. The older carpenter lifted the wooden bar that secured it from the inside. The heavy door opened with its familiar gentle creak. Cool air drifted inside. The smell of rain returned immediately. Fresh. Clean. Comforting. The older carpenter stepped outside first. He looked up at the gray sky. "It seems the rain has decided to stay through the evening." The father smiled. "I think you're right." The two friends stood beneath the roof for a moment. Neither seemed eager to hurry away. Finally, The older carpenter placed one hand upon the father's shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow. If the rain allows." The older man laughed softly. "The rain has never stopped us before." "No. It never has." They exchanged a warm nod. Then the older carpenter turned and disappeared slowly into the softly falling rain, his cloak swaying gently with each step. Father and son remained beneath the doorway for another quiet moment. The workshop behind them was dark except for the small lamp still glowing inside. Tomorrow morning, the doors would open again. The tools would return to their work. The scent of fresh wood would once more fill the room. But tonight, the workshop could finally rest. The father looked down at his son. "Shall we go home?" The boy smiled. "Yes." Together, they stepped into the rainy streets of ancient Rome, where the evening was only just beginning, and the warm lights of home waited somewhere beyond the quiet, glistening roads. Father and son walked slowly through the evening streets. The rain had become even gentler now, almost like a soft mist drifting through the cool air. It no longer sounded like countless drops falling from the sky. Instead, it seemed to whisper as it touched rooftops, stone walls, and the leaves of the small trees growing in quiet courtyards. The city was settling down. Behind wooden doors, families gathered around simple evening meals. Warm bread was shared. Clay bowls of soup rested upon worn wooden tables. Children grew sleepy beside the comforting glow of small oil lamps. The smell of fresh bread, herbs, and wood smoke drifted gently through the narrow streets. Every now and then, someone offered a quiet greeting while passing beneath a shared awning. Then each traveler continued home. No one hurried. The father and son crossed the familiar forum once more. It looked very different now. The great temple stood quietly beneath the cloudy sky. The marble reflected the soft light of scattered lamps. The puddles that had formed during the long day still rested upon the stones, each one reflecting tiny golden flames that trembled whenever another raindrop landed. The boy stopped for just a moment. He looked across the peaceful square. "It feels different now." His father nodded. "It has had a long day." "So have we." "Yes." They smiled. Then they continued walking. Soon they reached their neighborhood. The streets became narrower. The buildings more familiar. A cat slipped silently beneath a doorway, searching for a warm place to spend the night. A baker closed his heavy wooden shutters after another successful day. Far away, someone quietly played a simple melody on a flute. The music floated through the rain for only a few moments before fading into the evening. When they finally reached home, warm light shone through the open courtyard. The grandmother was waiting. She smiled the moment she saw them. "You are both wet." "Only a little," the boy replied. She laughed softly. "I expected that." Their cloaks were hung beside the hearth to dry. Warm soup waited in a clay pot above the fire. Fresh bread rested beneath a clean linen cloth. The little gray cat stretched lazily before curling once again beside the warmth of the fire. The family gathered together without hurry. They shared their meal. The boy spoke quietly about the cradle. About the old wooden box. About the visitor who had told stories of his grandfather. The grandmother listened with a gentle smile. When he finished, she simply said, "You learned many things today." "I think I did." His father looked across the table. The best lessons often arrive on ordinary days. No one disagreed. Outside, the rain continued falling. It filled the courtyard basin until the water reflected the soft light of the single lamp hanging nearby. After supper, the dishes were washed. The fire was gently tended. The lamp burned lower with each passing moment. One by one, everyone grew quiet. The boy yawned. The grandmother folded another blanket. The father looked once through the open courtyard toward the gray night sky hidden behind the clouds. Tomorrow would bring another day. Perhaps it would still be raining. Perhaps the sun would return. Either way, there would be bread to bake, wood to shape, families to care for, neighbors to greet. Life would continue as it always had. Not through great victories or famous speeches, but through ordinary mornings, patient hands, shared meals, kind words, and quiet evenings like this one. The boy lay beneath his warm wool blanket. The sound of rain entered softly through the open atrium. Drop, drop, drop. The same gentle rhythm that had welcomed the city before dawn now carried it peacefully toward sleep. Across Rome, thousands of lamps slowly disappeared, one after another. Homes became quiet. Streets emptied. The last footsteps faded into the distance. Only the rain remained awake. It washed the rooftops. It cooled the ancient stones. It filled the fountains and gardens with fresh water for another day. Above the hidden clouds, the stars waited patiently, though no one could see them tonight. They would return when the sky was ready. Until then, Rome rested beneath its blanket of gentle rain. The workshops slept. The markets slept. The temples stood silently through the night. The little wooden cradle waited for its new family. The repaired chair waited for another evening beside a familiar table. The old wooden box rested safely once again in the hands of the man who treasured it. And somewhere, in homes scattered across the ancient city, people dreamed ordinary dreams beneath warm blankets while the rain kept its quiet watch. So the rainy day came gently to its end. Not with celebration. Not with sorrow. Only with peace. Only with stillness. Only with the soft, endless music of rain falling over ancient Rome, as it had for countless generations before, and as it would for countless generations yet to come. The night grew deeper. The lamp burned lower. The rain whispered on. And, little by little, the ancient city drifted into a calm and restful sleep.